Hey, welcome back. Glad to have you today. If you're watching online, we're glad that you've joined us as well. There's already been several times we've mentioned a little bit about the ride-in, but I want to thank you for what y'all did to make that happen. You've probably seen these figures, but for the one or two that hadn't seen the figures, I want to let you know that you just brought it home for the 18th year. Just over 1,100 people here, 990 meals served, and it was good food. Over $51,000 as of today has been collected for the Webb family. And just one other little thing I'll let you know about. For the first time in 18 years, the company that we order the little vest pins and the key fobs from, they got the vest pins to us in time, but they didn't get the key fobs to us in time. They didn't come in. And so on Monday, I said, guys, the key fobs came in today, and I'm sorry that it's going to cost you money, but we're not going to pay for them. They're of no use to us. And they said, we understand. We were under an agreement. We didn't get them to you in time. I said, give us the address you want us to send them back to. They said, they're personalized to you. They don't do us any good, so just keep them. So we got a big pile of key fobs outside, and they're on the guest services booth. And if you want to pick up a handful, if you have a friend maybe who brought a car, or take some, and they're not going to do us any good, so take some of those with you when you go. You know, it's funny. We all know people who will work themselves to death, and others who would rather die than work. Two young men in a sleepy southern town were sitting beside a dirt road just outside of town on a lazy, hot summer afternoon, one facing one way with his back against a tree, the other facing the opposite direction with his back against the same tree. Presently, a young lady walking down the road came by, and she passed the tree, and she smiled at the young man that was facing her way, and she said, "Howdy." And he smiled back at her, and he said, "Howdy." About 10 minutes later, the other guy said, "Clem?" Clem said, "Yeah." First guy said, "Was she pretty?" Clem said, "Yep." Other guy said, "Man, I sure wish I'd have been facing that way." That's supposed to be funny. He wouldn't turn around. Okay, we'll never tell that joke again. All right. Let me try another one. Lazy, unmotivated people are not hard to find. A wealthy guy was passing through a little town, and he walked into a pool hall to ask directions. When he got inside, he saw about 6 men leaning back in chairs, hats over their eyes, one sitting on the floor, one laying on a pool table. And when he asked if anybody could tell him where the street was that he was looking for, nobody said a word. The guy was dumbfounded, and he reached into his wallet, and he proclaimed, "I'll give $20 to the laziest man in here." The guy on the pool table said, "Just roll me over and put it in my back pocket." Now, see, that's what you do. You have to follow up with a little energy. I didn't get much better out of that. It's embarrassing. It's embarrassing, but it happens. Well, whatever Moses was, he wasn't lazy. In fact, Exodus 17 tells us that he was burning himself out, working so hard leading the Jews. It wasn't until his father-in-law sat him down and told him that he had to start delegating some of the responsibility out that we see Moses begin to release some of the great burden that he carried. And that advice to delegate the responsibility out to the people probably saved his life. And it certainly affected the destiny of the people of Israel. And today in chapter 19 is where we are in our study of the book of Exodus. Today in chapter 19, we are standing at the foot of Mount Sinai. And Moses is about to climb the mountain of God to receive from him the 10 greatest laws the world has ever seen. In fact, lots of historians say that those 10 laws are the foundation upon which almost all modern world governments rest. But before that can happen, at the foot of that majestic mountain, we're going to learn something very enlightening about what it takes to stand between God and man. What does it take for us to be God's ambassadors? Now, if you want today, look at this as kind of a little preliminary briefing. We're not going to get into the 10 Commandments today. We're at the foot of the mountain, and we're getting a little briefing about what it takes for us to be ambassadors of God. This is huge. Everything that's going to follow, and I don't mean just in Exodus, I mean all the way up through Malachi and the Gospels and Corinthians and Galatians and Revelation, everything that is going to follow is based upon what we're going to hear today. It's huge. Because God is about to entrust, think about this, God is about to entrust his plan for all of mankind onto this fickle people. And almost casually, in passing, he mentions 3 conditions which these people are going to have to meet if they, the Jews, are going to be entrusted with this precious information. Think about it. Laws are about to be handed down to this ragtag assemblage of ex-slaves, which are expected to be dispersed across the entire planet. If you had 10 laws that God had given you, and they were that important, you would probably say, I need to meet with the 5 most powerful kings in the world, and we need to get these laws out. No, God chose a group of ex-slaves to give all of this to. And those laws are even going to form the foundation of our own form of laws and government. I mean, in this nation, thousands of years later and halfway around the globe. Through these decrees, these people are going to be standing in the gap between God and all of mankind who will ever be born. What an intimidating responsibility. And what I want to tell you is that today, you stand in that same gap. As the Church of Jesus Christ, you are going to have to bridge the divide between God and all the unsaved people around you. You are that ambassador. You are that one standing in the gap, like Moses first and then the people of Israel after him. Please understand the weight of responsibility that if you are a Christian, some of you have come here today as seekers, some of you have come as guests of somebody else, but if you are a Christian and you claim to be a follower of Jesus Christ, there are some people within your sphere of influence who will never be brought to Jesus if not through you. And I really believe that. I don't know how many. Some of you, there might be hundreds. Some of you, there might be just one. But there are people in your sphere of influence that will never come to Jesus unless it's through you. And they don't even know it yet, but they are depending on you to bring that message. And more importantly, God is depending on you to bring them that message, to show them the way to happiness and fulfillment and ultimately salvation. And just like the Jews had to be prepared to take their message to their world, so must we be prepared to take the message of Christ's salvation to our world. I want you to see today 3 things that we must be in order to stand in the gap, in order to fulfill our mission of the Great Commission. Number 1, we are each one called to the priesthood. We are called to be priests. Now, I doubt very many of you feel like you were called into the priesthood. We have a retired minister among us that's a faithful part of our church. Walt Weingar felt that he was called into the ministry, into the priesthood. The rest of you might be saying, no, Walker, I don't feel like I'm called into the priesthood. But let's read Exodus chapter 19, verses 3 through 6. Then Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain. and said, "This is what you are to say to the descendants of Jacob and what you are to tell the people of Israel. You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words you are to speak to the Israelites." Now, if you're an Old Testament scholar, you like reading the Old Testament, then you may remember that God originally ordained a specific family to be priests. Among the Jewish nation, the family of the tribe of Levi, we call them the Levites, they were set aside to be the priests. And in order to be a priest, you had to be of the family of Levi. But that was not the goal. That was a stopgap measure to get us to where we're supposed to be today. That was a stopgap measure to suffice. You Levites, y'all are going to be the priests for now. But that was a stopgap measure. In a time when the Israelites were ignorant of spiritual things, they were in their holy infancy, but it pointed to a time when every believer would be a priest. And I'm going to prove that to you. It'll take me a minute, but I'm going to prove that to you. Friends, that time is now. Way back when Exodus 19 was happening, when those events were happening, it was just pointing to some time in the future. That time is now. 1 Peter, New Testament, chapter 2, verse 9, clearly teaches that there is no longer any distinction in the family of God between the clergy and the laity, or in our common language, between the paid preachers and the man or woman in the seats. There is no distinction, and I hope I can prove that to you today. There's no distinction anymore between the guy who's the paid preacher and the people in the seats. In fact, that verse is even the fulfillment of the conditional promise we just read here in Exodus 19. You will be for me a kingdom of priests. It says there in 1 Peter, but you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation. Remember Exodus 19? It says, you will be. Here in 1 Peter it says, you are. Right? So you will be, Exodus 19. 1 Peter, you are. And Peter is not talking to the Israelites here. He's talking to the church. Peter is talking to all believers. So like it or not, Peter's talking to everybody in here right now, and everybody who's going to be in here for the second service as well. Now, this is big here. If you're a believer in Jesus, you are called into the priesthood. That's right. You are expected to be a minister before God, regardless of who you are. I hate to hear a Christian say, can you believe he said that? And he's a minister. Or, can you believe he did that? He's a preacher. I hate to hear that because they're probably talking about me. But listen, if I hear you say that, it just tells me that you don't understand at all that all Christians are supposed to be priests. That idea. Now, and that's kind of tough for us. We were raised in a time when you had this respect for the guy who's standing behind the pulpit and proclaiming the word. But all Christians are called to be priests. It also disappoints me if I hear you say that, because it means you are furthering that incorrect notion for a new generation of Christians that there's some kind of difference between ministers and all other Christians. I have folks who attend Rappahannock Church of Christ here, and if they are new to our congregation, some of them have told me that they're confused about what they're supposed to call me. They wonder why I'm not called pastor or reverend or father. And it's because we take this teaching of the priesthood of all believers very seriously. those special titles that you give to preachers foster a false notion that I'm somehow fundamentally different from some of you. You see, we are all priests now under the grace of Christ. All of us who are believers. I'm just a believer like you. In my case, my gift, I think, is preaching. So you simply, I'm trying to put this in an easy way to understand, you simply decided to pay me so I could devote my full time to the church without having to have a second job. You, for years and years now, have supported my family so I don't have to divide my time between a secular vocation and the needs of the church. In fact, I did that my first few years. I worked locally at a regular job, and I preached here on Sundays. But the church grew to the point that we felt like we needed someone here full time. So the people said, let's pay Walker a full-time salary so he can devote all of his time to caring for and growing our church. So just call me Walker. If you're new here, just call me Walker. I'm just like you. We're both called into the priesthood, you and me both. It just so happens that I do it full time. So call me Walker. If you don't like me, call me Mr. Gaulding. And smile when you say it. But this is really, seriously, joking aside, it's not a small detail. It's important to think of yourself as an ambassador. Now, according to Webster, an ambassador is someone sent by a country or a ruler as its official representative to a foreign country. A person who acts as a representative or a promoter. That's what an ambassador is. You're a representative of God to people who still think of him as an alien or a foreigner. They don't really know him. And so you are that ambassador between that God that you know and the people who don't know him. You are a promoter of all things good and right, but especially you're a promoter of God himself. You're an ambassador. And if you're an ambassador, then you first have to understand that you are a minister. You are a priest. Exodus 19:6. You will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Now, if that's true, we need to act like we understand that we're all priests. So when you're wondering what you ought to do, you're in a situation this week and you're wondering what you ought to do, when you're wondering where you ought to go, when you're wondering how you ought to act, when you're wondering what you ought to watch, what you ought to say, just ask yourself, how would I expect a minister to act in this situation? And then respond accordingly. When you see a need, don't say, the preacher ought to do something about that. Instead, say, hey, I'm a minister. I need to do something about that. If not now, then when? If not here, then where? If not you, then who? Get used to the idea of saying this until it becomes second nature. I'm called to be a priest. Just get used to saying that until it's just second nature to you. You just understand it. I'm called to be a priest. We're called, like Moses, to stand in the gap between God and man with conditions. And the first condition is individual. Just has to do with me only, and that condition is I'm called into the priesthood. That's an individual condition. The second one, though, is collective. We're called to be united in obedience. We're called to be united in obedience. In the last 7 days, our elders talked to the staff a bit about the ride-in. And they commented on how inspiring it was to see so many people pulling together. We're guessing it took about 200 volunteers to do what we did last week, and that was you guys. But we were talking about how the elders were telling us how inspiring it was to see so many people pulling together to create such a successful event, from people parking cars to the grill masters to registration and greeting specialists to welcoming and hospitality groups to music and bands and tech people, just so many. But there could have been no success if everybody had just ignored what the bigger goal was and just did whatever they wanted. 2 weeks ago, we talked about the Battle of Stavelot in Belgium in World War II and how that little group of soldiers, you remember that little group of soldiers who worked together, came together, they were from even different countries. They came together and worked together for a common goal, and in turn, that victory in Stavelot, when coupled with thousands of other soldiers and units and divisions, contributed to the victory at the Battle of the Bulge. Imagine how different the outcome would have been had the soldiers just disregarded any master plan and just went off fighting on their own. Surely, chaos and defeat would have resulted. Especially in the military, united obedience is essential to win a war. Look with me at Exodus 19, verses 7 and 8. So Moses went back and summoned the elders of the people and set before them all the words the Lord had commanded him to speak. The people all responded together, "We will do everything the Lord has said." Look at verse 8. The people all responded together. So this isn't individual, this is collective. They were of the same mind. They were united. Now let me ask you this. Let's just dream for a second. What if the passage had read like this? So Moses went back and summoned the elders of the people and set before them all the words the Lord had commanded him to speak. Some of the people scattered in the crowd responded, "We will do some of the things the Lord has said." I'm thinking the next verse might have been, so the Lord brought fire down out of heaven and consumed them. In this moment that we're studying here in Exodus, strong unity was critical. If these people were to be entrusted with the most important message the world had ever heard, it was vital that they be united. It was vital that they be together as one. Now, this is something I really want to stress because of the time that we're in, the culture that we live in. Unity is useless if we all agree to something that isn't correct or right. That's obvious, but we don't always act like it's obvious. Notice what they said. We will do everything the Lord has said. They made a united commitment to be completely obedient. United in obedience. Unity alone, if it is not accompanied by obedience to the right authority, is of little value. People might be impressed by a whole lot of people all agreeing to the same thing, but they might just all agree on something that's wrong. Dr. J. Vernon McGee, an author, Bible commentator, and Baptist preacher, once put it so clearly and succinctly. J. Vernon McGee said, "Sometimes a large majority of agreement just means you got a whole lot of fools all together in one place." It is my belief that this is the reason that the often touted ecumenical religious movement in the United States has been such a miserable failure. Now, let me explain a little bit if you're not familiar with that term. The ecumenical movement was supposed to be a powerful force. It meant that all churches, despite their wide disparity of beliefs, were supposed to all pull together and support each other, even though there were great fundamental differences. So denominational leaders across our country just came together and said, let's just join hands across all of our denominational lines and be one big happy family. That's the ecumenical movement. Now, that's a noble goal. It is. But if it's not accomplished through a diligent search for truth and obedience on which to unite, it means nothing. We have to unite around truth. So they smiled at each other and they held hands and they sang Kumbaya while their churches lost record numbers of members. It was a disaster. You can hold hands and play nice, but if you're on the Titanic, you're still sinking. Unity is not the goal. Let me clarify. Unity is not the goal. No one has ever been more unified than the Taliban. Egypt in Moses' day was unified. Nazi Germany was unified. The goal is unity in obedience to God. If we unify over error, I'm not interested. That's not uniting a family, that's unleashing a fire. You and I are entrusted with the single most important message of our or any time, and that's the saving message of the gospel of Jesus Christ. That's what we unify around. And I'm telling you, if we're not united in obedience to God, if we're not walking the walk, the world's not going to give us a hearing. The world is not going to listen to us. Check this out. This is why you can have a church of 1,000 people, but if just 3 of them are found to be entangled in some serious public sin, the world will shrug off the 997 and say, hypocrites, look at them. We are called to the priesthood. We are called to be united in obedience. And finally, we're called to be trustworthy. Now, no offense to the people who sell used cars. But for years, all through my growing up years, the symbol of an untrustworthy guy was a fast-talking guy in a plaid jacket standing on a used car lot trying to sell you a 71 Malibu that was only driven by a little old lady to church every Sunday. That was the symbol of an untrustworthy guy. We used to have a guy in Cincinnati, and I don't know whether this is a thing that is all over or whether it was a Cincinnati thing, but it was Madman Dapper Dan's used car sales. And he would have these ads, and he said, so come on down to Madman Dapper Dan's used car sales and get you a good one. He said, I'd give them away, but my wife won't let me. If you ask people today, what's the symbol of the untrustworthy person? They might say it's a politician or a journalist or a lawyer or a preacher with his hand out. To be honest, we don't trust anybody much anymore, do we? Some of the most profitable businesses in the 21st century are private investigators and people who sell surveillance and alarm systems. Think about that for a minute. It's crazy. Some of the most profitable businesses in our time are private investigators and people who sell surveillance and alarm systems. We're so cautious that we record people with our doorbells. Virtually every modern car has some kind of anti-theft protection. Some come with a 360-degree recording device around the car. And lots of young people will do a background check before they accept a date to the movies. And while that's sad, I can't say as I blame them. There are entire stores in New York, LA, and Chicago, and many other major cities that sell only, this is their whole stock. There are stores that sell exclusively covert listening devices, wiretaps, and hidden cameras. I just learned this week. I didn't know this one. Did you know there are some private investigators that make a lucrative living and they only have one specialty? They investigate only your fiance before you tie the knot. Dang, that is sad. But it's lucky for us. You know why? I think, like rarely before, our culture is so hungry for something that's real and trustworthy. I really do. I think our culture is hungry for things that are real and things that are trustworthy. They want to be able to trust that something is actually what it claims to be. They want to meet somebody who's really who they present themselves to be. That they don't have some ulterior motive or some hidden agenda. Not an internet star, not a cool hip-hop artist, just real, just genuine, just trustworthy. In this environment, we have an unprecedented opportunity to make a bold impact simply by being trustworthy. Listen to this passage. The Lord said to Moses, I'm going to come to you in a dense cloud so that the people will hear me speaking to you and will always put their trust in you. Now, this is an odd arrangement, isn't it? But the key thing here is that God wanted people to trust his people. Nothing's changed. God wants all the people outside these walls that you know who have yet to find Jesus, God wants them to trust you. When I ministered in Kentucky, I found that some families, and I'm sure it's true here in the Northern Neck too, I've heard less about it here, but when I ministered in Kentucky, I found that some families had unfair stereotypes placed on them simply because of the past behavior of their families. Let me tell you what I mean. These folks over here were labeled as moonshiners. They might not be moonshiners, but their families have been moonshiners for a couple generations, so they got labeled. Oh, Walker, don't waste your time with them. They're a bunch of moonshiners. This family would fight at the drop of a hat. They're violent. These sisters are all easy because one of them was. This guy never ever told the truth. This family over in the next holler, they never bathe. Church folk today are often unfairly mislabeled because of the behavior of a few. You've heard it. They talk like they care down at that church, but nobody really does. They'll pick you up in the parking lot with a golf cart, but then they don't care what happens to you after that. Churches are just snobby social clubs. They just want your money. They talk like heaven, and they live like hell. I'm telling you, if people around you feel like they can't trust you to be real, you'll never lead them anywhere. Now, the good news is you don't have to be a hero. Just don't be plastic. You don't have to be a hero. Just don't be plastic. Be who you say you are. Be honest. Be trustworthy. Try to live according to the values that we talk about every Sunday. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 12 says, live such good lives among the pagans that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day he visits us. Now look, we're not doing our best only so people will trust us. We're doing our best because people are going to make up their minds about God based on our behavior. Man, that's a heavy burden. We're not trying to be trustworthy and real and honest and transparent just so we'll look good. We're trying to do that because we know that there are people in this community who are going to decide who God is based on what they know about us. And that's a heavy burden. What if people judged your whole family based on just your behavior? What if they labeled your parents, your saintly mother, God rest her soul? What if they labeled your parents? What if they labeled your children and even your grandchildren according to what they know about you? Well, for some of you, that might be a good thing. You might actually be the best one in the bunch. But please hear me clearly. There are people who are judging right now. They are judging this church based on your behavior. They look at you and they either say, man, something's going on down in that old grocery store because that's not the same guy I used to know. Or they're saying, you know, he's been going to that church down there for 3 years and nothing's changed. He's still the same jerk he always was. I wouldn't waste 5 minutes going to that church. It doesn't change anybody. And somebody might say, But Walker, you're missing a key point. The people in Exodus trusted Moses because they saw him talking with God in a cloud. That's never happened to me. Let me tell you something. The only thing you're missing is the cloud. The only thing you're missing is the cloud. When people can see that you really have an honest relationship with God, they will slowly start to trust you too. Remember that the Israelites were entrusted with a world-changing message. And they learned three things that had to be in order for them to be God's ambassadors. Let's try to remember those three things today, because we stand in the New Testament era, and the gospel of Jesus Christ has been entrusted to us for distribution to the crowds of lost people we encounter every day. And those same three things that the Israelites have to be are what you and I have to be if we want to serve as an ambassador. We're called to be priests, we're called to be united in obedience, and we're called to be trustworthy. Look at those qualifying conditions again on the screen. Just read through them silently for a second. They're three of the goals of our church. Not written down as such, but they're three of the goals of our church. If these goals on the screen make sense to you, and you want to join us as ambassadors, then don't wait another minute, because when you wait, you miss opportunities. And these opportunities are life-changing. The band's going to come back out on the stage right now, and as they do so, if you have a decision to make for Jesus, you know, the Bible's very clear that we can, any one of us, no matter where we've been, no matter what we've done, we have an opportunity to come to Jesus. If you want to do that, there'll be folks from our Faith Walk team right down here to meet you. I'll meet you. You can be baptized today if you're ready to answer that call. Stand up, please.